Hello there, welcome back. So today we're going to talk about street photography, which is a bit of an enigma in photography circles. It's probably one of the most exciting genres of photography, at the same time being one of the most difficult to do and certainly one of the most difficult to make money out of. And it's not a genre that I've ever tried to make money out of, except for perhaps including street photography in books that I've sold. But I've certainly never used it as a income stream. I was thinking about that in prep for this podcast, about how people make money as street photographers, and I guess outside of selling them or exhibiting them, what other options do you have? So I had a quick look around the interweb and discovered that it's pretty much that. You've pretty much got options of selling through galleries, selling through publishing your own books or your own prints, or seeing if you can get them licensed. Maybe some places like Getty and other major rip-off merchant stock sites will take street photos. I'm sure they will, but I'm not quite sure where the value is in that. When you consider the thought, the passion, the tech skills that go in to making a good set of street photographs, why would you be giving them away? So I'd never really thought about it before, because I don't do them to make money. I do them for the fun of doing it and to kind of hone my craft a little bit. But it'd be interesting. I might do a little further research on that and do a amendum to this and just, see what comes out of further research into what do you do with the pictures when you've got them. So it was just a quick interest in, read a few forums and a few journals about it, and it's pretty much, you're not going to get commissioned to sell street photos, or very rarely. It may be that some stock site wants a specific thing that you might have, or you might be able to go and shoot, but generally speaking, if you're going to use street photography as an income stream, then you've got to think about how first you're going to get income from it. But I don't really have to worry about that, because it's not the reason I'm doing it. I do it because when I first started teaching in mainstream education, I was doing teaching all types of photography to students, and I'd started doing a little bit of street photography when I went to Liverpool for the first time, 2014, when me and my wife Kirsty went to Liverpool. I just loved how the streets look, so I started using my phone, really, taking pictures of the streets. And as I've explained before, I'm not a street photographer, and I'm certainly not an in-your-face street photographer, so I was already shooting the hip. But then in doing research for teaching things to students, I came across other photographers. William Klein is a good example of street photography, and also Eric who does for shooting from the hip, and kind of more aligned with what I was doing. But it wasn't something I'd done a lot of until the last 10 years. So I came at it from just loving the city I was in and taking pictures of it just for the thrill of doing it, and that kind of led me on to realising there was much more going on the street than you realised. And once you start looking on streets and you walk up and down the streets with a photographer's hat on, it's a wondrous place for making photographs, whatever town, city or village you might be in. So that's kind of where I was coming at it from. Every time then we went anywhere, Liverpool, York, wherever we went for trips, days out, even in my hometown of Rotherham and Sheffield, I'd have the camera and I'd be looking at stuff, photographing people going about their day, or people doing interesting things, or interesting buildings, or the rubbish, the dereliction, the whatever it is, the juxtaposition of new and old. I was looking through it all. So I kind of got into it as a means of fun, expression, getting a bit of frustration out, practicing. And over the years, I like to think I've made quite a good bank of decent images that I've never, outside of including them in a couple of books, like I said, never really done anything with them. And there's some ethics behind that, which I'll get into shortly. But I thought, as I went to New York earlier this year, I did loads of street photography and quite enjoyed it therapeutically and creatively. But it was a little way past, and I thought I'll do something a bit more fresh. So when I went to Rome last week, me and Kirsty went to Rome for the week, which was just hot, extremely hot, but at the same time beautiful, relaxing. The food, as you might imagine, I like my food, so wall-to-wall pizza was like heaven to me. So the whole experience was great, but the people were just fabulous, and you got a great mix of regular, everyday people going about the business. Lots of tourists. Trevi Fountain was just insane. It's like, you ever been to a football match or a rock stadium and been coming out of afterwards? How it's just thousands of people standing around. Trevi Fountain was like that every day, just insane. The experience in Italy, regardless of whether I took any photographs or not, was just insane. So what I did when I got back, I've looked through and I've edited some of my favourites. 400 and odd pictures of people in the streets, buildings, and what I thought I'd do today is I'll just show you through some of my processes of picking, editing, and presenting. And it's a little different when you're picking street photography, particularly the way I shoot from the hip, because a hell of a lot is left to chance. Now, when I say that, I mean I set my camera up to work for me, so I'm using shutter priority. So I've got my shutter at 400th of a second all the time, because I'm moving, subject's moving. 400th is pretty fast, still lets quite a bit of light in, particularly when it's sunny. I switch my ISO between auto and whatever I think it needs, depending on the situation I'm in, but probably most of the time it's on auto. And the aperture is just flicking around, so I'm compromising sometimes with depth of field, depth of focus, because the aperture's jumping around, but it's quicker than jump around on manual every shot trying to get something right. The only major issue you have is how do you focus it, how are you going to set your focus. So I've traditionally gone with a centre focal point, try to get the camera somewhere near the person and take the shot hoping that it's in focus. Eric Kim has another process where he just, let's say, focuses 4 feet away and then tries to wait until the person's 4 foot away from him and takes a shot, hoping it's in focus, and his hit rate's pretty good actually, probably better than mine. So I tried a few different approaches. I tried a little bit of the AI face detection, which was just horrendous. It did nothing. Nearly most of the pictures I used in that way were rubbish. So I kind of pretty much kept to my centre focus, single focus point, hoped the person was in focus, and more often than not it was. So I've edited 400 and odd pictures out of 2,500. I did have the camera on burst mode as well, so I was probably taking, for a lot of scenes, I was taking 3 or 4 shots, so 2,500 divided by 4. I didn't take as many shots as what it sounds, but to get 400 plus, which I kind of like, that I'm happy with, that are in focus enough to be usable. That's the other debate with street photography, as to what's acceptable in terms of focus. And like with a lot of photography, you're not always looking for perfection. You're not looking for perfect exposure, perfect composition, perfect focus. You're looking for stories, and on the street we're telling stories. So it took me a long time to learn that sometimes a slightly blurred moving target, if it's interesting, is better than a not interesting picture that's perfectly sharp and all the other things that come into an exposure. So I try not to be too hard on myself in terms of street photography. If it's miles out of focus and looks a bit crap, then I won't use it. But if the story's there, even though the person may be moving a bit blurred, or it's focused on the hands, not their face, all those other things, I tend to not get myself in too much of a state about, because the nature of the beast, without jumping out, stopping and saying somebody stand there for a second, I'll take your spontaneous photograph. Without doing that, then you there's a lot of things that are out of your control. So pointing the camera in the general direction, hoping you get a shot, taking a burst of 3 or 4 shots, one of them will be somewhere near. It kind of pretty much works for me. So that's my approach, but with some control. And then, because I'm shooting in RAW, I can get into Photoshop and I can have a look at them and bring out the detail and try to make it how I saw it and how I felt it at the time. And that's a little different. I think I must see the world in contrast. Everything's heavily contrasted for me, and each to their own. People all have the different tastes, but I think I see the world quite contrasty. So when I look at my pictures, I'm always trying to make them how I felt them at the time, so they always end up being a little contrasting. You'll see as we go through this edit, how I get to that point. So I'll pick one. We'll start with the personals. This guy, I just saw him, is really interesting. This is behind the Pantheon in the centre of Rome, and like with all major cities, there's lots of homeless, and there's lots of deprivation, and you know, you kind of got around the front, you've got thousands of people queuing to go and see this fabulous building, which is strangely enough, just a slight aside, when you get in it, it's another one of those places that's maybe could have been, possibly, we think, which tells me we don't know anything about it really. But it's interesting to see all those thousands of holidaymakers trying to get in there, and just around the back there's a guy collecting cardboard to sleep on, and I didn't actually realise that until I came to edit it. So I'll open it up in Photoshop and we'll have a look in RAW and see what I got straight off the camera. So you can see straight off the camera, that's not too bad. ISO 200, f4.5. Well, this one 1/250th of a second, so I must have adjusted it at this point for some reason. Can't remember why, but I must have. And that's not too bad when you look at it. And focus wise, it's pretty acceptable, I think, really, when you consider he's moving, I'm moving. She's a little distracting in the background, but is actually almost nicely framed. I'll probably crop that a little bit lower, but as a general exposure, that's not too bad. Not too bad at all. But there are a couple of little clipped highlights I want to bring back, and I think I'd like to see a little bit more of his character. So what I'm going to do with that is, first thing I'm going to do is actually look at the colour, because it was very warm and the camera was set to daylight. But as I've said in previous videos, that cameras light all the time. In fact, the colour balance, white balance on most cameras is crap, and it certainly rarely marries up with what you see in the histogram. So if we jump to auto, takes all that red off, but that building there, that is red brick, so I know instinctively, I know that's not quite right. If I put it onto daylight, which is what I shot, so I shot auto, as shot, that was set to daylight. But if we put it actually on daylight, it just goes a little warmer. You can see that. As shot, that's set to Canon daylight, and then daylight in Photoshop. Vastly different. And if we look at the histogram, it's had loads of red in there. But I do know from memory that brick building behind him is quite red. You can see a little bit in the shirt. Awful, using the colour dropper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trust my memory, and I'm going to go with daylight as I shot it, because I think with the Adobe Daylight, it's just pumping too much red in, particularly into his shirt. So I'm going to leave that as was. Next, I'm going to look at exposure, and I said I want to get rid of some of the highlights. I think there's a couple of highlights here just annoying me a little bit. So I'm just going to drag maybe 20 or 30% off there, and you can see that. You can see the highlights dropped a little bit. But conversely, I want to see more detail in his face. I want to see more of the guy. So if I just pump up the shadows a little, which gives me a little bit of highlight too, you can see if I just click before and after, the detail, particularly the shadows. And because I like to slightly underexpose and then bring it back at the next stage, I'm just going to knock 25% off the exposure there, just to make sure I've got plenty of room to play with highlights. Okay, there's lots of highlights there. I'm going to OK that now. So that's the first process I always do. You'll have seen that in the other videos I do. Check the raw file, see where I feel it fits. So now we've got him into into Photoshop, and again I'm going to look at my histogram. Got a little bit of missing exposure here to the right, which is great because it means I can feather the highlights back in where I want. So if I open up the levels and just pop in some highlights into there. Just pops, gives it a little pop. And although Photoshop's telling me that I'm already pinching shadows, I'm going to pinch a little more because, like I said to you earlier, I like contrast. So if I flick between the two, see the little punch. Now I know some of you are saying, but Lance, you took that off in the raw file. I did, and that's because I like to feather it at this stage. So now I've done that, what I can do is, this will behave, using the paintbrush tool and just dropping the opacity on it a little bit to 50%. I can brush in a bit more of the detail back into there, so it's not quite so blown, because that was really the only place where we've got a little bit of blown highlight. And yes, I know I'm being really finicky, but if this was going to go to print, those highlights would just be banks of white, and that's not what we want, is it? So just quickly brushing back in his shirt detail, which is quite nice. And I'm also gonna just, I'm probably gonna crop that out, but I'm gonna take it out anyway. Let's have a look. So conversion, edit, conversion, edit. You can see the color shift. And using levels and brushing out those highlights, we've just made that slight alteration, but we've still got blue and red in the same place. Not quite got so much yellow now, which will have been in the highlights. So quite happy with that. We can see his face, see his expression. I know, yes, he's a little bit soft, I know that. So quite happy with that. What do I want to do now? Well, I'm not going to do any more work on that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to Control Shift and E, and then I'm going to file save as a copy, save as a JPEG copy, size 12. So if I make a mistake from now, I've got a copy of that. So I said to you before, she's a bit distracting, isn't she? So before I go any further, I'm just going to have a play around with taking her out of the picture just to see how it looks without her. So I'm going to edit content aware fill. Let's see how fill deals with her. Oh, she's gone. Like so. So just quickly, yeah. Is it a true street photo? I think so. I've just taken a distraction out. It's no different to taking out a red blob or something. She doesn't really add to the scene. She's not a lot of people, a lot of posh people sitting there with loads of money with a Tesla. There's no juxtaposition there. She's just a young holidaymaker that just happened to get in shot. So I wanted to take her out. If there was a juxtaposition there, I would have left her in. So let's just have a look how that works. Alright, so I'm gonna do it this way. I'm gonna clone out the pipes or the railings, whatever it is, he says. Just like so. Just to tidy that up a little bit. There we go. So she's gone. Now as I'm looking at that, is there anything else there that's distracting? Got rid of the distracted girl. That highlight there, as nice as it is totally distracting to me. So again, I'm just going to make a mess of getting rid of it like that. So you can see people won't be looking at that now. So that's the kind of distractions out of the way. What I'm not keen on though is all this space up here. Now if I was going to use this as an advert and it needed some text on it, I'd probably leave it, but I'm not. So I'm going to crop it. I'm going to centralize it more so we just see him, not so much what's around him. So like I always say, when you crop him, make sure you crop him for purpose. Original size, original ratio, don't want to change that. Just going to centralize him just until he's centered, which is probably about there. So I'm probably getting rid of about 15 or 20% of the picture, and he's now centralized quite nicely in the frame. Looks quite good. I've not done anything else other than get rid of those bits. I haven't done anything to him. I'm not going to sharpen him up or any of that stuff, because remember, I've got moving target, guest settings on camera, I'm moving. The fact that there's only that little bit of motion blur there, I think probably the focus kind of hit around here somewhere, around his chest, so that my focusing wasn't miles off. It's just that slight bit of motion blur that's kind of killed it, but it's I can live with that. So again, I'm going to flatten the layers. I'm going to save that over our last copy. In fact, I'm going to call this one copy 2, because we'll have a look at the two side by side. The first edit I did in that one, see how we think. And let's drag it back up and see. So that was the first one. That was the second one. Slightly distracting background, non-distracting. Not centered, lots of spare wall space. Not much use to anybody. Centered, less wall space. You can still tell where he is if you knew where that was. So that's it for me for that picture. So it's taken me 10 minutes to talk you through what I've done, but if that's me editing it, it's 30 seconds, maybe less, to do that. And I've got a colour copy, and what I always do with my street photos is make a black and white copy just to see how it might look in black and white. So we'll do that now. Same process for me as always with black and white. Using the layers palette, choosing a solid colour, making sure it's a negative colour, so anything that's on the grey scale, grey, white or black. Click OK, change the blending mode to colour, instant black and white. I want more punch, I want more highlights, more shadows, so I do that by loading in the RGB channel, pressing Control. You'll see that little thing appear above the cursor. Click on RGB. Then we're going into curves in here. Make sure your curves are set up for pigment ink. There's a video of mine out there shows you how to do that if you're not sure. Click in the center. I'm interested in the output. I'm going to give it 15% highlights, and now I'm going to copy that, invert it, and now this time I go back the other way, and all this does is affect the shadows. So minus 5% shadows. So highlights for highlights only affects highlights. Shadows inverted only affects shadows. Yep. And that's a much punchier, much more black and white. We're pinching on the edge of detail here, so again I'm going to click onto my highlights layer, click into the mask with the paintbrush tool on 50%. I'm just going to brush back in some highlights there because I don't want them to be blown out if I make a print. Just going to brush them back in. It's not so bad. Maybe that back wall as well, that's a little hot. But other than that, good to go. Shadows are looking good. Histogram slightly underexposed up here where I've taken off the highlights, but I'm not worried about that. File, save as copy, copy to M for mono, like so. I'm going to close that down, and then we'll just have a look at these two. Copy to, like that. Oops, what did I do there? 8 windows. And the mono, pop them both up side by side, and you can see quite nice black and white and colour version of the same picture. Detail in his face, you can see his expression. His clothes aren't overexposed. Colour's good on the left. The mono's great. So the only way I'll ever make a mono. Learned part of that from Guy Gowan. I've mentioned him in one of the videos. And that's it. So I'm going to move on to the next picture. So next picture, it's really interesting that I have a same approach to all of my photographs, and I'll show you that. Well, I mean, that was obviously a person on the street, but this time I'll edit one. I took off the Pantheon. I think this is the Pantheon. Hopes this is the Pantheon. And you can see a very similar approach in terms of exposure and style, although in this instance it should be sharp because I did centre point focus. I was still, the building wasn't moving. ISO 100, f6.3, little compromise there on some sharpness, and 1/400th of a second, so it should be nice and crisp and clean, which it is. And again, these are all shot on the Canon R6 mirrorless, which I got when I went to American Naval. So again, first thing I'm going to shot, these were all shot on sunny day, set to sunny day on the Canon. If we change it to daylight there, you see a slight shift. If you watch, don't look at the picture, look at the histogram. Not much though, is it? So quite like that little bit of extra red on the daylight, particularly in the mid-tone. So I'm going to leave that to daylight there. And again, I want to see a little more shadow here, even though I always underexpose everything. I want a little shadow in there. So I'm just going to add 15% shadow in there. I'm going to pinch the highlights back 5% just to be sure, because it's quite heavily loaded over this side. But that's probably the sun in the background there. And again, I'm just going to pinch the exposure down 20% just to give me something to play with to feather in the next stage. Okay with that, happy to go. I like negative space in architecture shots, but I think there's probably a little bit too much negative space in this one. So I'm going to crop that, I think. But just to start with, we can see where the sun was in the sky, roughly, over to the left here. And that's quite nice because it almost backlights the shot, but it leaves enough room for detail in the front without having to put some light in or really massively hike up the ISO. But again, first thing I'm going to check is levels, and you can see, look, we're pinched right at each end here. That's because of the work that I did on the raw file. And remember I said I took a little bit of highlight off and brought a bit of shadow back. If I hadn't have done that, we might have lost lots of that detail in there. So I'm quite happy with that. If we're just going to look in here, look, we can see detail right under here. Now I'm not bothered about seeing detail in the background there because that should be hidden. That's what helps the shot. Oh, what's in there? What's it like in there? But that's actually quite a nice kind of almost silhouette, but not, because we've got some nice front light, which is just kind of leading its way up the pillars. You can see the highlight on the outside pillar, and the light's just kind of leading its way up there, just enough to illuminate the front portion here, which I think is quite nice. So I'm going to get rid of the levels because I don't need them. What I'm going to look at here, I think, is cropping, and again, cropping for purpose. So let's see what happens if we just edge it in a little bit. If we go right to the edge, like that, does it change the context of the building? Does it now look as if I've framed that too tight? Don't be afraid to speak up. Personal choice. I think it feels a bit, doesn't it now? Feels a bit like, oh, it's being squashed in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crop that again, but this time I'm just going to not quite pinch it all the way to the building. I'm going to leave a bit of space there. And now I think it's got a bit of space to breathe either edge. What do you think? We know where that building goes. I've not chopped it off at the edge. It's just a little nicer in terms of how it's compacted into the shot, but it's got a bit of space to breathe. So I'm quite happy with that. So while I've done exposure, colour, framing, I'm looking for things that are distracting. And I noticed when I was looking at a lot of these shots, there's lots of birds' nests and crap growing out of the top of them, because clearly they don't look after them. And one thing that annoyed me here was this drain pipe. And this building's not so bad, but when I was looking around the other buildings, some of it was quite annoying. So You have a couple of choices here. Do you leave it? I hope people don't notice it. I'm thinking once I've pointed it out to you, you can't help but notice it now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out because it's just annoying. It looks like a bad crop or looks like I put a blue background in and missed a bit when I've cut it out. So I'm going to Control J to make another layer. And at first we're going to explore, see how good Adobe's AI is. And we're just going to lasso around it, and then we're going to go content aware fill. Come on, content fill. Come on, Phil. Let's see what you can do. And wow, that's pretty good, wasn't it? Let's have a look. Oh, that's pretty good, isn't it? Pretty good. I'm not offended by that highly. Alright, when you look closely, it's got a big line. You see the line where I did it. And it's not quite lined up the brig, has it? So let's do it the old-fashioned way. Let's try it like this. Let's try it with this is just a cloning stamp. I'll just adjust the size of the brush as I go along. And I'm not worried if I make a mistake, because I can paint back in like the old artists used to do. My cousin Liam's a great artist, and he always used to say to me, "Oh, I'm not worried about that. I can paint my way out of that." And I always used to think, "Man, how's he do that?" And then I became a photographer and started editing, and realised how he used to do it. And I'm not saying it's genius. It's ingenious. It's just what's the phrase? Experience. Or foresight, planning. It's almost like you knew it was going to happen before it happened, and you didn't let it worry you, because you knew, even though once it had happened, you could just go back and just fill it up again. Then the thing you have to be careful about when you're cloning is not repeating yourself or brushing things out so they don't look like they've been repeated. And that's where, changing the subject slightly, that's where NASA go wrong with their fake pictures of Earth from space, because the guy that does it, the guy that admitted that it's done that way because it has to be, did too many clones of the same clouds. So next time you're looking at a picture of the Earth supposedly from space, just see how many clouds you can spot that are exactly the same all over the world. And you'll also notice in the world that whenever an official picture comes out of the world from space, it's always bloody cloudy. Wherever you are in the world, it's cloudy. So you might be thinking, well, aren't you doing a lot of detail here? Nobody's even going to look at this. Well, that might be true, but a bit of a, what's the phrase? Stickler for doing it right. Alright, so that's what I've done. So Adobe's, let's zoom in so you can see that. Adobe's content aware, or mine. A little bit rough there. Oops, wrong button. Just going to go back, fix that bit there. Oops, fuck that up once. Right, view, fit on screen. Alright, so yeah, annoying, not annoying, annoying, not annoying. So I'm not happy with that. I'm going to save that again now. And then content aware can go in the bin, file, save as a copy, save as a JPEG, click OK, bing, done. So I'm happy. That's it, job done. Now, it took me 5 minutes to show you guys. Would have took me 30 seconds if I was just doing it for the sake of doing it. Again, now I want a black and white. So solid colour, picking a neutral colour, anything on the grayscale. Just to prove that, we'll pick white, and then we'll go normal to colour, bang, mono. All the colour's still there, it's just masked by the mono colour fill. Over to channels, control. You see a little square highlighted on my mouse. Click RGB. It loads the luminosity into the picture. We're then going to use curves. Curves is set to pigment ink, by the way. I'll just show you that. Curve display options. Pigment ink, not light. It comes out of the crate set to light. Make sure it's pigment ink. And then you can grab straight in the middle on 50-50, and then shift key and down arrow key gives you 10%, so what you can bang loads on. I'm going to go from 50 down to 30, 20%. Loaded the luminosity in, so it's only affecting the highlights. Command or Control and J and Control I to invert it. It's now only going to affect the shadows and midtones. Click in there again. Go. I'm just going to put -5 on, so 55. And if we look at that, see the drama? So look at the pillars, the pillows and highlights here. Pillows and highlights. Ready? Pinch. Shadows. Pinch, pinch, pinch. All more rounded. Black and white. File. Save as. JPEG copy. M for mono. So that's all maximum. And then again, if we look in here and we look at e-shirts, black and white and the colour, and lots of drama, not much of an edit. 2 seconds stopping in the street. As with all my kind of architecture pictures, they're always looking up. I think looking up more should be done. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there you never see. Excuse me. If you walk around a city, any city, Rome, Liverpool, London, York, Barnsley, Rotherham, anywhere, as you're walking around the city, totally and utterly ignore the bottom floor, where all the shops are, the cafes. Ignore that. Use that as your horizon. Everything up is interesting. Everything below is dog shit, mainly. Quite literally in some places. But all the good stuff, all the history, all the wow is above the first floor. And also within that you get nice angles. You get to see more of the sky and more of the interesting stuff. So that's how I approach my architecture, street architecture, building photography. I'm just going to have a quick look at this picture, which is from the Roman Forum. I'm not going to do a lot on this. I just want to show you something on it. And then I'm going to do one more person picture, and that'll be it for today, because I don't want to bore the life out of you. So, this is the Roman Forum, which is down in the Colosseum in Rome, funnily enough. And it's just a nice, interesting area of stuff that's left around. It's difficult when you're photographing this stuff because you're a tourist, and we did all these things in tours with guides, so we didn't miss anything. But what that does, it restricts you as a photographer. So all my vantage points for all these wonderful places were the same as everybody else. But also, as a photographer, I would have wanted to be down inside these buildings, like there were those columns out there. I wanted to be sat on that looking up, or down in the well here looking up, laid on my back, in amongst it. And you can walk in amongst it, but it was 40 degrees. Me and my wife had been 3 hours on our feet doing a tour, and we were just too knackered. So my excuse for not getting any more in-depth pictures of this area is because of knackeredness. But you can see, looking around it, it's a photographer's dream. And if I just pinch the exposures a little and just, give some gravitas as to what could be there if you had the time to go in and get involved, get in there, get your hands dirty as it was, and which I didn't, unfortunately. The picture of the Pantheon would be just one of a million if you could get in there and really go to town. And I think just by adding loads of contrast and a black and white filter gives you such a, I don't know about you, but for me that is like a architecture photographer's dream. Imagine lying on your back looking at all that and having hours to do it. So whenever I go back to Rome, Kirsty doesn't know this yet, but she will. When we go back to Rome, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to go either before the summer or the end of the summer when it's cooler and spend all day scrounging around on the floor photographing the Forum. Because I think it's just a wondrous little place full of ridiculously fabulous shapes and shadows. And I think that's the thing for me, it's the shadows. Look at that. Photographer's dream. So we'll close that down. We'll come out of that and we'll look at one more for now, for today. I'm going to look at this picture I took. We were sat outside a taverna. Do we know what a taverna is? Restaurant, basically. Kirsty said to me, it's going to be really hot, Lance. She doesn't call me that, but that's what she said. It's going to be really hot, so you need to make sure you're ready for that hotness. And I wasn't. 38, 40 degrees is a killer. So we were probably spending, I don't know, upwards of 35, 40 pounds a day on bottles of water from what we call lucky men. You know them, lucky, those guys that walk around selling shit to you. I was actually very, very, very glad they were around that day, because as annoying as they can be, every 300 yards I needed another bottle of water. And at €2.50, or actually they were 2 for a fiver bottles that size of ice water, which they clearly refilled out the kitchen sink and brought out, but I didn't care. We'd have died without that. So as much as I thought I was prepared for it, I wasn't. So we decided we probably had 30 bottles of water at this point. We were going to go and sit in a tavern and have a drink, a real drink. By a real drink I mean I think we got Sprite at this one. And I just noticed sitting there, I was taking loads of pictures of people walking past, but I just noticed a few people walk past, and I was looking through my glass and I saw they looked a bit weird, so I thought, oh no, I'll try and capture somebody going past in the glass. So I did. I caught this lady just here. And again, it comes back to that old adage as a photographer, using things that are around, using things as props, using things to aid what you're doing. So I did, and it's just a glass really. But it made an interesting little ditty, and I was sitting down so I was able to focus properly, so I could focus on the people walking past. So this is a series of about eight shots, so I kind of got her starting on the left and she walks across dead centre. So this one's the dead centred one, which is pretty much slightly bit of motion blur because she was motoring, but it's in focus, shall we say. But the beauty of shooting raw is we can look at things we can bring out in the edit. So again, the as shot colour balance was daylight and camera. Cloud is a little bit too orange probably. Daylight, there's not a lot to choose between that, and as shot adds a little bit more warmth in, so I'm going to go with that. But then if we look at the shadows, we can bring quite a lot back in terms of shadows. Now highlights, got a couple of blown bits up there that might be a little bit distracting, so we're just going to tone them right down like that. I'm going to put on plus 40% shadow just to bring some shadow detail back. And again, from exposure, because it says we're still nipping, I'm going to just reduce that 15, and then I'm going to open it up and do my feathering at the next stage. Quite often, I said this before, when you convert from RAW to JPEG, you lose some colour, you lose some exposure. It's just the way it converts it strips detail out. And you can see the histogram's similar, but we have lost quite a lot of highlight in the conversion. Hope you can't hear that in the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch it right up to where that little peak starts there. And yes, I know I'm overexposed. It's telling me, go away. But that is these little areas here that aren't that kind of, I'm not that worried about. I can see the lady quite nicely now. And what I can do is, if I click in the mask there, paintbrush, 50% opacity, I can brush that back out anyway. Anyway, that I think might be a bit too hot. So, but we've added in some drama in terms of contrast. By underexposing before, just bring it back and feathering it now. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm actually quite happy with how that turned out. It's a little bizarre, but she's nicely sat in the frame. Yes, it was one of about 8 burst shots, but one of them worked. In a perfect world, I probably would have had her head in the archway. So maybe I would have moved slightly round, got that. But hindsight's a great thing. And I was 150 degrees, I was dying. I was thinking, my God, are we going to get a taxi back to the hotel or are we going to walk? That's how bad it was. So the fact that I got something at all is great. I mean, she's kind of between the two archways, which is nice, but I think I would have preferred her in the large archway, slightly to the right, slightly different framing. But that's all right. So I'm happy with that. Again, save as a copy, like that. And then always make a black and white, because I'm a sucker for black and white. Solid colour. Ooh. We'll go for that colour this time. Change the blending mode. Loading the luminosity. Curves. Set to pigment ink. Start at 50-50. Bring the output down. I'm going to go for 40% this time. Control J, Control I to invert it. Going to push back. You'll notice I very rarely put any more than 55 or minus 5% in there. Now you'll notice I've gone real high on the highlights. You see that? But what I'm going to do is click in the mask and bring some of that back. And what I want to do here is lead the viewer to follow that line up like that. So you'll notice if I brush out that, we've got a bit of a golden spiral going on. Maths. Just get rid of that a little bit. And if we can follow it around, like a bit of a reflection stroke arc going there. Just lead your eye to follow it in, which I quite like. Not so noticeable on the colour shot, but quite noticeable on the black and white because I pinched the highlights really up. M for mono. And again, we'll take a look. One colour. One black and white. Pretty quick process for me. And again, you can see the you can see that arch there. You can see it, but it's much more prominent on the black and white. Yeah, and I quite like that. So that's just, what do we do with it? 3-4 pictures, all the same process. And I dig one more out, and then I'm going to leave you alone. All right. So I just wanted to finish off going through one more picture. It's this cycle here, and cycle. He says cycle. So I always find interesting things on streets. I'm a sucker for finding socks and gloves or umbrellas, and something about bicycles, particularly ones that are abandoned or left on their own, kind of intrigue me. And I think some of it is because of the human element behind it. Clearly a human's parked it there at some point, sometimes today, sometimes years ago. But they fascinate me because of that human story and how they're kind of like, a bicycle is probably one of the most basic machines you're ever going to find, but they're quite often a lifeline for people. So the fact that somebody's left it there, loves it, and it might not be there when they come back, or it might be there in 20 years. Or it might be there in 20 years still chained up and just be a pile of rust, which I've got some just like that. Fascinates me, but this one was parked in a way where all the shadows are great. It's parked in like a little, we call them a snicket general, like a little road with lots of overhanging buildings, so there's lots of shadows coming down, and all those shadows just intrigue me. And when you put that together with the element of the human element, that intrigue of what was it is, I loved it. But bear in mind, I'm shooting for the street, so I'm on auto ISO, I'm on shutter priority. I've got a real shallow depth of field, so if I'd have shot this properly, I'd have used a big depth of field, so everything would have been a lot sharper. But it's in focus and it's not moving, which is a bonus. So given the fact that I was using street settings, it's a little hot, so I'm going to pull all the highlights off that. You can see that if I pull it down, and if you watch the histogram come with it, I'm getting rid of a lot of highlight. There's some shadow detail in here I want to kind of retrieve, so I'm going to put 30 or 40% in there. You can just see then that crossbar there is now visible. And I'm going to again just pinch the exposure down 20%, 25%, just to give me a bit of leeway in the edit to bring back detail. I shot, so it was set onto daylight in Canon camera. Swap it to daylight. Does it go a little redder? Slightly redder. Just that 20% maybe. But I quite like that because the wall was quite red and that chain. So I'm going to click OK. I'm happy with that. So, nice bike. So again, first things first. Levels. We're already pushed each end, but I want to bring a little back. So I'm going to put 10% in there. Now you see I said 10%. I didn't say I'm going to wank my slider across. You can click in here and use the arrow up and down key to do 1%. Just 1 point, like that. If you hold down shift key and do the arrow, it gives you 10 at a time. So you can see now, look, starting to get lots and lots and lots. So if we go, see this little start of data here, we've got a little line, then we've got a build up of data. I'm just going to take it to that build up of data, which is about there. And I'm going to overdo by 5% the shadows. And if I just click on and off on that, watch the drama. Quite timid, not much going on, bang, lots of drama. Not much going on, bang, lots of drama. Now there might be some little bits on here that are overexposed. If we take that off, difficult when you've got pure whites anyway, but I'm not particularly worried about that because nobody's going to look at the detail on that basket and go, that basket was a bit blown out there, Lance. They're just not. But look at the detail on that back one there. That's great. Look at all those spokes and all that wire and all that shadow. It's brilliant. So just by doing that one thing, there, for me, pleases me no end. That contrast that we've added, I think, is beautiful. So that's all I'm going to do there. Now, it did occur to me that on the right hand side here, these shadows looks like a man with one leg. I think it quite amused me a little bit to think that the guy, one-legged biker. Some people might look at this and go, are there some distractions here? What's distracting us? So sometimes you might get bits of paper on the floor, or that brick in that corner, or that little stone there, whatever that's doing. And normally I might click them out, but I don't think they're too distracting. I think because of the colour of them, size, shape, and how they kind of fit in with the shadows, quite happy to leave those in. Love that. Look at that shadow there. That's great. You couldn't ask for that. So normally I might crop at this point or take out distractions, like I said, but all I really want to do is make sure that it's centered, and I think it's not quite centered, is it? I hate the print. That's about centered, about the same distance front to back, centered. We're not losing too much. I don't want to lose that stone if I can help it. Just scuttle that over to the left a little bit, like that. Enter, bang, job's done. I'm happy. File, save as copy, JPEG. Happy to do that, and then again make a black and white. Pick a solid colour, not a colour. Black and grey and white aren't colours, are they? Load in the luminosity, curves, start in the middle, bang in 30% brightness on there. Control J, Control I to invert it, whack that down to 55 or minus 5%. Ooh, that's quite nice, isn't it? A bit hot. Yes, it's a bit hot, so I'm going to crack into there. I'm going to put my paintbrush on 30%. 30% opacity. Just going to bring some highlight down, just that little bit. just like that. Bang, bang, bang. A little bit there, a little bit hot there. A little hot. But that's it. Mono process done. We've retained all the colour because we've not desaturated it and ripped all the detail out of the colour. We've retained all that lovely colour under there. We've just got that colour fill masking the colour, and that's a beautiful black and white. And if we look at the two side by side, he says like that. Two beautiful black and white and colour. Not much fuss, quite easy to shoot and edit. Just saw it on the street. It's got a story to tell. The shadows alone were worth the trip for me. If that was the only picture I had from my trip to Rome, I would have been happy. But we got a little bit more than that, I know we did. But spoke a bit before about ethics and the ethical things in photography. And street laws or copyright laws are just the same in Italy as they are in the UK, luckily. So you can shoot anywhere on the street, nobody can say anything to you. They can't force you to delete pictures or any of that crap. Your copyright's yours for, I can't remember if it's 50 or 70 years after death. So we're all right and all that kind of stuff. Ethics. Should you be shooting people on the street? Should you be doing it from the hip so they can't tell? You go around any major city, Europe, America, South America, Brazil, China. Try it in China. There are billions of cameras photographing you everywhere. Every shop, every ATM, every car, every bus, they're all photographing you. And you don't walk around going, that boss has just took a picture of me and didn't ask me permission, did it? You don't, because you're pre-programmed to ignore it. So why should you chase a photographer down the street because he's took a picture of you? You shouldn't and you can't. If you're walking about in public, you know you're being photographed, you should be happy to be photographed. Unless you're having a private conversation or you're doing something with a child, don't just leave photographers alone. They're only capturing beautiful moments. If somebody takes a picture of me, I'll say, crack on, mate. In fact, send me a copy. I'd like to see what you did. Now, maybe that's just because I'm a photographer. Maybe just because I'm a bit more of a free-thinking human being. But there are no laws to stop you doing that. But there are ethics. And an ethical dilemma I've had for a long time is photographing the less fortunate, should we say. And I do it, but I don't show them. Because I haven't yet decided where I stand in terms of showing people's... what's the phrase? Showing people's personal lives, their reality. I certainly don't want to make money out of people's misery and misfortune, but I find it intriguing to photograph it. And maybe one day I'll collate them all into a book and sell it and give them money to charity or some shit. I don't know. But I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures from London, Liverpool, York, New York, Rome, loads of places of the homeless, the less fortunate. And the only ethical dilemma I ever find with street photography is whether to show those or not. I tend to not show them. I don't publish them publicly. You can see a few here. I'm not going to enlarge them. Because of those reasons, because I don't think it's... What's the context? If I take a picture of somebody off the head on Spice, I'm not taking the picture for something newsworthy. I'm not saying, look at what's happening here. I'm not taking it to go, look at this fabulous photograph I've got of somebody smashed off their head, because there's no creative kind of juice in that for me. I'm just documenting something I've seen, something which ethically doesn't sit right with me, in just showing it like it's nothing. An example would be this picture here of this couple flying down the street on their bike. I thought it was quite funny. Again, it's a street photo. Whip the camera up, shoot, done. One of about three. Slightly when you look at it, it's some motion blur, but not much. But I just think it's brilliant that in this day and age we've got a scooter which is about as safe as a condom with a hole in it, and a guy riding it with his girlfriend, I'm assuming she is, perhaps wife, on her phone. And it looks to me like he's more interested in what's going on the phone than she is. And this was a really crazy junction. I mean, an absolute mad run junction. And these guys were just cruising along on their bike, which I thought funny. Ethically, no problem in posting that, none at all. Or maybe they might get done for riding while phoning their own look out in it. But that's just a couple going about the business that I found funny. A few shots after that, or before it, sorry, I got a couple of homeless guys clearly struggling. One was clearly on spice or something. My morals and my ethics said, don't show it. Don't do anything like that. Put it in your bank. Take the picture because it happened. Take the picture because you were there and you saw it. I don't know when or if I'm going to figure out what to do with these pictures. I've got 10 or 12 years worth of pictures like that, which tells pretty unique and pretty horrific stories in the main. But I haven't ever done anything with them. So if anybody has a decent answer to that, an ethical, moral answer to that dilemma, please share it with me, because I haven't found it yet. And until I do, those pictures will not see the light of day. They'll probably sit on my hard drive until the next comic comes along and ends it all. So that's it. That was my trip to York and my little insights into street photography and what I do. Felt sorry for that guy, the guy there. That was 40 degrees heat right outside the Coliseum. He was selling those. If I'd have been him, I'd have had them all switched on me. I wouldn't be selling anything. But again, character, lots of character, going about his business. Probably gets photographed 15,000 times a day. So that's it from me, really. It was just a bit of a chat about what I found in Rome, what I saw, how the city was beautiful, people were great, food was amazing, weather too hot for this cookie, far too hot for this cookie, but I'll go again in a heartbeat. Not sure the next episode will be. I've got loads of things cooking in the background. I've been doing some product photography just recently, so I might do a little chat about that. I'd forgotten how absolutely difficult product photography is, and how technically switched on you've got to be, and creatively. Took me about an hour to get back into my creative flow when I was doing it. Before that, I was kind of like looking at the backdrop and the lights with a blank mind, thinking, what the hell's this? So I might do a little piece on product photography. I might not. We'll see. Anyway, I'll have something for you by middle of next week. Hope you've enjoyed this. If you've got any questions or anything you want to say, or any comments or anything you'd like me to cover, let me know. Other than that, thanks for listening. Catch you soon.